Something I always found fascinating about the whole camera world is that we're all accomplishing the same task. We're either shooting a photo or we're shooting a video, but we all do it just a little bit different than the person next to us ergonomically. So some people put grips on their cameras, some people use just the camera itself, some people build cage rigs or use gimbals. So it's a really interesting topic, and it's exactly what we're talking about today. What's up, guys? Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Sam, and today we're talking about all the different ways that you can use your camera to shoot video clips, such as gimbal rigs or cage rigs or just handheld. And that's way too long for a YouTube title, so we're just gonna call it gimbal versus handheld. There are a lot of different accessories that you can buy for cameras. I think for my camera alone, there's like 30 different cages that you can buy from all different companies. There's hundreds of thousands of different accessories that are all interlocking and interchangeable. They all do something a little bit different, but in the interest of time, we're just gonna be talking about cages, grips, gimbals, and the camera itself, and that's it. Personally, I've always been a gimbal guy. I can't even remember the last video shoot that I did where I didn't use my gimbal, but this is because the first camera that I ever owned didn't even have IBIS in it, so I had to use a gimbal in order to get smooth footage. So what ended up happening was a whole year into my camera career, I still had to use my gimbal for every single shoot because I didn't know how to shoot handheld. There is a technique to shooting handheld reliably, and I just never practiced it, so I couldn't do it. And this may defeat the whole purpose of the video of gimbal versus handheld, but I don't think there's a clear winner on either side. They're both tools for different situations. For instance, if you're at a concert venue, you might not want to bring your gimbal with you because it's going to get knocked around, people are going to bump into the arms and tweak the motors and things of that nature. You might want something more discreet like a cage rig or just the camera itself. It reminds me of when camera people say, I only have prime lenses, or you'll only find zoom lenses in my bag. I think both those people have the wrong idea. You should use every single tool available to you to get the job done and cover all your bases. You wouldn't tell a carpenter you can only use the electric saw, you can't use the handheld one, because you're limiting yourself for no reason. For the longest time, I thought that gimbal equals smoother, more cinematic, more professional looking, and handheld is just for when you don't have access to a gimbal and you're in a pinch. It turns out I was 100% wrong about that. Handheld absolutely has its place in a cinematic, professional video. Imagine shooting a fight scene or a concert or action sports. You need that handheld look to make the viewer feel like they're there. Obviously, you could shoot all three of those scenarios on a gimbal, and it's probably going to be a little bit more watchable and a little bit easier on the eyes, so to speak, but it's not going to give you the same feeling as being in the action with the subjects. This isn't a hard and fast rule, though. If we look at something like the John Wick series, there's not really that much shaky cam in those movies, even though they're action movies. Everything's very smooth. You can tell exactly what's going on as far as the action is concerned. Whereas if we look at something like the whole Jason Bourne series, everything is so shaky that you can't even tell what's going on in most of the action scenes. And I actually prefer the John Wick style of shooting to the Jason Bourne style. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up IBIS in this video. So IBIS is in-body image stabilization, and if you don't know, some cameras have the ability to shift the sensor around to compensate for whatever your hands are doing, thus creating a smoother video. My A7S III even has the ability to zoom in 10% and run something like a real-time warp stabilizer over the footage so you get an even smoother image. The reason I bring this up is because before I had a camera with decent IBIS in it, I never really wanted to shoot handheld. It was just scary, and it felt like I was just gonna ruin all the shots by making them too shaky with my hands. Now that I have a camera with decent IBIS in it, however, it's a lot more accessible, and I want to use handheld more often. And not all stabilization is created equal. My first camera didn't even have IBIS in it. My second camera did have IBIS, but it wasn't all that great. It was kind of jerky and unnatural looking to me. Now, my new camera, the A7S III, has IBIS in it, and I absolutely love it. I've heard that other cameras like Olympus and Panasonic have absolutely amazing IBIS that blows my camera out of the water, but I've never used them, so I don't really want to comment on them. The A7S III, on the other hand, is perfect for my needs. It's made me want to use handheld a lot more. I'm tired. Let's turn it into tomorrow. There, now it's tomorrow. I thought it was going to be easier to tell, but I have blackout curtains, so it's kind of... I didn't really need to do that. Before we talk about the pros and cons of handheld versus gimbal, I want to talk about the word handheld for a minute. Handheld encompasses a huge variety of different accessories that you could put on your camera and shoot handheld. What I mean by handheld in this part is just my camera with its cage and one grip on it, and that's it. One of the things I love about shooting handheld over shooting with the gimbal is it's discreet. You're a lot more low-key when you just have a camera in your hand as opposed to carrying around a large gimbal rig and telling everybody, hey, I'm carrying carrying around a bunch of expensive equipment, please come rob me or please come tell me not to shoot here. The next thing is it's way quicker to get set up and start shooting handheld, so you don't have to balance your gimbal, you don't have to carry your gimbal around with you, you don't have to set up the gimbal every single time you want to shoot a video clip. You just have your camera and your strap and you're ready to go. The third great thing about handheld is it's more raw feeling than shooting with the gimbal, so you really feel like you're there. You feel like you're in the action, or you're moving around, you're being jostled around by whatever's happening if you're in a vehicle or you're in a crowd and getting bumped around, so it really gives you that first person view when you're shooting handheld. Obviously, the biggest con to shooting handheld is it's never going to be as smooth as shooting with a gimbal. You could use tricks like using a skateboard or the ninja walk, but if you're really going for that smooth and cinematic look, you're going to need to use either a gimbal or a slider. Another downside to shooting handheld is the monitor on my camera actually interacts with the grip, so if I want to shoot low or really high, I have to use an external monitor to be able to see what I'm doing. And I've never experienced that with the gimbal. I can always see my monitor when my camera's on my gimbal. The last thing I don't like about shooting handheld is shooting vertically is a little bit more difficult because the grip is on the side of the camera. If you have a removable grip that goes on the edge of the camera, like on the top, it wouldn't be that difficult, but if you're just shooting with your camera itself, shooting vertically can kind of be a hassle. Moving on to the pros of shooting with a gimbal, obviously it's going to be more cinematic looking, it's going to be a lot smoother, and it's going to look like more effort was put into it. It's going to look a little bit more professional. And speaking of looking professional, the second upside to shooting with a gimbal is kind of weird, but hear me out. It looks more complicated and professional when you have your camera on a gimbal than when you're just holding your camera. If you're a camera person, you know that the appearance of your camera rig has nothing to do with the finished product or how good your footage is, but clients don't really know that, and sometimes they make ridiculous assumptions. I've never personally had this happen to me, but I've heard stories of people pulling their camera out and starting a shoot, and the client says, "What is that? Like, is that your second camera? Where's the real camera?" So it does happen, and I don't agree with it, but sometimes you just have to make your client happy to make money, so it is what it is. The third and final upside to using the gimbal over using handheld is its versatility, especially if you pair it with the app. You can set up moving time lapses, you can set up tracking shots, you can have it track your face if you wanted to, you can do FPV shots, you can do vortex shots, so there's just a bunch of different stuff you can do with the gimbal that you just can't achieve with handheld. One of the big downsides with gimbals is battery life, especially on my gimbal, which doesn't have a removable battery, so once it dies, I have to recharge it to continue shooting. Another downside to shooting with the gimbal is how much it weighs, so I don't care how strong you are, if you have your gimbal with a monitor and a camera in a cage on it and it weighs like 10 to 15 pounds, if you shoot for 4 hours, your arms are going to feel like jello. I mean, even my arms get tired sometimes, and I mean, like, come on, man, like, I'm getting kind of swole as the goal. Yeah, just make all the noise you can outside, please. As much as humanly possible. So in closing and as an overview, the clear winner for me is the gimbal. It's always going to be my main way of shooting video, but I see the merits of handheld, and I have been trying to incorporate it into more of my shoots. It may be completely different for you though. You might love shooting handheld and only ever want to shoot handheld and hate gimbals. I just personally feel a lot more creative and like I get a lot more usable footage when I use my gimbal. And that's all I got. If you got something out of this, consider going down and hitting the like and the sub button. It means the world to content creators like me. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Sam Has a Spending Problem, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.